So because the pattern for round 3 gets a little bit more complicated, I want to do that round with you. So for round 3, we're going to do the sequence of a single crochet stitch followed by an increase stitch, a total of 6 times. And I also want to show you, with doing round 3, how to properly use the stitch marker. So first, get into crocheting position, put the yarn on your hand, put your hook in the loop. Remember that your hook should be in the loop in the way that when you pull on the yarn connected to the yarn ball, the part of the yarn that moves is the yarn that is closer to you. And remember that you also want to make the loop that the hook is in small enough so that it's just big enough for the tip to clear it easily, but not super loose, not super tight. Okay, so for round 2, we had left the stitch marker in here and then put our hook in it to help us see where we needed to put our hook. But now you're probably a little bit more familiar with looking at stitches, and also I want to show you how you should properly use stitch markers so that you don't accidentally stretch out these stitches. Because the more things you put in the hole, the more likely your yarn's going to get stretched out. So we're going to take out the stitch marker first and then put our hook in here. So take a good look at where it is and see that horizontal V. And now we're going to take the stitch marker out, put it aside, and then put our hook in that horizontal V. And now we're going to do a single crochet stitch like the pattern says. And so that is a yarn over, pulling that yarn through the horizontal V, so you have 2 loops on the hook, yarning over again and bringing the yarn through both loops on the hook. And now we've completed a single crochet stitch, which is the first stitch of round 3. So we're going to pause and put the stitch marker back in there. And that means I'm going to let go. And so that I don't accidentally lose the stitch I just made, I'm going to pull the hook away from the piece and make this working loop nice and big so I can be nice and comfy as I pick the stitch marker up, look at the rim of my piece, locate that horizontal V that I just made, and put the stitch marker under there. Then I'm going to get back in crocheting position and this away and do an increase stitch next. So remember to use the tugging method to see which hole moves, to see what stitch you just made where. So that hole moved, which means we want to put our hook in the next available V, which is this one. And we're going to do an increase stitch, which is 2 single crochet stitches in the same spot. I sped through that since by now you're pretty familiar with the increase stitch. And then in case you're having trouble seeing where to put your hook again, just do the tugging method again. We see this hole is the one that gets bigger, so that's where we need to put our hook to complete the second half of the increase stitch. So now we're at a point where we've completed the first 2 stitches of round 3, but if you were to count them up, they actually count as 3 stitches because those 2 stitches were a single crochet stitch followed by an increase stitch, and the definition of an increase stitch is that it's 2 single crochet stitches put in the same spot. And now we're going to repeat this sequence a total of 6 more times to complete round 3. And because you'll be alternating these stitches, it can be a bit hard to keep track of your counts and your stitches when you're just learning how to crochet. So I want to show you an easy way to keep count. So you'll need to grab a sheet of paper and a pen. And what I want to show you here, this is what the pattern says to do. This sequence of a single crochet stitch followed by an increase stitch 6 times. So I've just written this out here for demonstration purposes. You don't have to write this on your own sheet of paper. What I wanted to show you is we've done this first sequence. So if I were to count that up, I would just tally up 3 marks because I know that those 3 stitches are done. Now remember, it counts as 3 stitches because this increase stitch is actually 2 single crochet stitches in the same hole. All right, so now let's do this next sequence of a single crochet stitch followed by an increase stitch. So look at your piece and you want to find the next unworked V. So let's just do a single crochet stitch in the next stitch. Okay, and I'm going to pull my loop a bit because I'm going to pause and I'm going to mark that I've done a single crochet stitch. Now back in crocheting position, I'm going to do an increase stitch in the next stitch. That was 1 stitch. So I'm going to tally it up again. And then I'm going to put a second one in the same hole to complete the increase stitch. And then I'm done. So here I know I've completed the second sequence of the single crochet and increase stitch. So now I can just repeat that process all the way around until I get to the end. And I'm going to fast forward so that you can see what round 3 looks like when you're done. All right, so I'm now done with round 3. I've been counting in my head that I actually do have 18 stitches here, but I've also been writing it down on this sheet of paper. So I'm just going to double check though, even though I counted on the paper and counted in my head, that I have 18 stitches, because it's better I find out now than later that there's a mistake. So starting from the stitch mark by the stitch marker, just count every horizontal V. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Remember, you don't count this loop as a stitch, just the V that the loop comes out of.